Hello, Integral Math. This is my, not a response to your video in particular, that'll be another video, but this is just a general defense of philosophy to try to convince you that maybe there's something to philosophy. Try to think of philosophy as a confusion killer. The point of philosophy is merely to find confusion and try to clear things up when the scientific method can't do the job. For instance, like if we're talking about a disease, science can handle that. You can use the scientific method to clear up the confusion. But when it comes to things like right action or ideas or what counts as justification, what is truth, what is logic, you can't just apply the scientific method. The scientific method is only descriptive. It's not proscriptive. It can't tell you what to do. It can't handle those kinds of confusions. So in these cases, philosophy steps in to clear away the confusion. A lot of times in ethics, it's difficult to determine what exactly is right or wrong action. That's the thing. We intrinsically feel, I guess from social biology or how we're raised, that certain things are right and certain things are wrong. But we don't know why. We need sort of a method of investigation to determine right action. And the thing is, science cannot do this. It can help, like in virtue ethics. Virtue ethics, there's a certain reasoning about right action that focuses on good habits and bad habits. And scientific method can definitely be determined to determine what are some things that are good for us, but it cannot tell us how the system of virtue ethics should be set up. And it can't tell us that we should follow virtue ethics. It can only be used in a descriptive sense, not in the prescriptive sense that virtue ethics is in terms of right action and the ways that are most healthy for you to live. And that's another thing. I question how you can determine right action from wrong action without philosophizing. I don't think it can be done. Other areas of confusion where the scientific method can't do the job is when we're talking about things like ideas, justification, truth. These are things which can become very confused. Confusion arises. It's philosophy's job to move in and clear away the mess. You can do this. That's its main purpose. I don't like naming names in philosophy. I think it's a cheesy tactic. But if you want to know names of books or people to start off with in this arena, I can message you in the comments. But anyway, yes, that's how you should think of philosophy. And when it comes to ethics, how do you handle the moral skeptic with only science? What if someone says, I know that X is the right thing to do, but I still don't see why I should do it? There seems to be confusion here. You can't just apply the scientific method to clear away this confusion. Because the confusion isn't something like, where does rain come from? That's a science question. Science can definitely deal with that. But ethics is more difficult. And also in epistemology too, it's difficult. And there's certain gray areas where things are really confusing. Like with the many dimensions. And even, there's still philosophy of mind. That's still a credible investigation in philosophy, because there's confusions there too. I also want to point out that there's actually two definitions of philosophy. There's the common usage and the academic usage. In the same way that with theory, the common usage of theory is a guess, a hypothesis. And the real definition of theory is evidence. I have evidence, here it is. Same with philosophy. The common usage of the word philosophy is simply one's opinion. The academic usage is a very difficult academic study, really, in terms of clearing away confusion. You can get inferences from the clarity. Like in ethics, once things are made clear, you can start making inferences. Okay, well, it seems like I should do this then, which is virtue ethics. Or maybe the greater good for the greater number is the best. Or maybe, since this is the way that now that we have the ideas clear, this is how you should be able to do inquiry and stuff like that. And also, I want to bring up one last point. I've noticed this a lot. Scientism within atheism. Which, by the way, I want to point out that I'm an atheist, and most philosophers, or I don't know if most, but a very, very, very large number of atheists are in fact atheists. Atheism is really popular among philosophers. But what happens is that believers use philosophy a lot. They throw that word around all the time, and atheists hear the believers, so the Christians, the Muslims, talk about philosophy, and then they sort of attach philosophy to theology incorrectly, immaturely, and then think religion whenever you talk about philosophy, which is very silly, very wrong. So I just want to say that might explain certain aversion between some atheists when it comes to philosophy, even though atheism is actually popular within philosophy, which is the funny thing. And let me see how much time I got on this. Yeah, I guess I can go on to some other stuff. Now more in responding to your actual video, instead of making a second video, I'll just do it here since I'm only in 5 minutes. Big Lundy was actually wrong. There are no laws of logic. I'm talking about, now I'm directly talking to your video. There are no laws of logic. You can't prove logic with logic. You can't prove logic with scientific method either. That's why it's best to think of logic in terms of rules. There are rules of logic. If you open up a logic textbook, you will notice that they're not laws of inference. They are rules of inference. It's because you cannot prove the framework for determining truth with the framework. I have a video on this called the logic box, which is very useful. Basically, the logic box is the framework for determining truth. And the logic box is made up of these rules of logic, like non-contradiction, things like that. And you use it to determine truth, but it cannot be used on itself. So that's when I get into my next step. Believing and knowing. I'm not sure that you can really know things in terms of absolute certainty, but you can definitely believe in things enough to act on them. And I do believe in the rules of logic enough to act on them. Act as if they are certain because I know them enough. Let's say different definitions of know, confusion. You know what I mean. It seems likely that they will always hold, so I have enough belief to act on them, on the laws of logic. That's another bit I want to bring up real fast as an interesting tangent. Induction fallacy in science. Science can never know certainty, because just because something happens over and over and over and over again doesn't mean it will always continue to happen over and over and over again forever. But we can still believe science enough to act on it because the evidence is strong enough. That's the problem with contingent facts. It's only contingent that the sun will rise tomorrow. It won't necessarily rise tomorrow, but our evidence for it rising tomorrow is so strong that we can believe that it will, because it will likely. The likelihood of it rising tomorrow is very high, but it's still only contingent truth, which means it's still possible for the sun not to rise tomorrow. It separates it from logical necessity, which is these rules of logic. It's logically possible for the sun not to rise tomorrow. Also, Big Lundy did this thing that really bugs me about people who are into philosophy, and I try really hard not to do it, and I follow into it sometimes. It's never good to say, read this philosopher's book, or it's really not a good idea to quote philosophers too often, especially since philosophy is really hard, and if you try to quote it, you will fail. You can't put it into quotes. It's too big, too difficult. It cannot be done. Now to the topic of infinities. There's a view that I like. It seems very likely to be true. It's called nominalism, which is the idea that abstract objects do not exist. When you're talking about that guy who said that infinity doesn't exist, you were like, well, does 2 to the 2th power exist? Well, yeah. 2 to the 4th, does that exist? Yeah. And as to the point, the idea is that eventually you'll get to a biggest number, and that they have to say that doesn't exist. Well, I'm more consistent. There are no such thing as numbers to begin with. So there's no 2, there's no 3. The ideas exist, though. The idea of 2 exists. The idea of 3 exists. And the idea of infinity exists. But there are no 2 in the world. There are no abstract objects that are in existence. Also, there's no infinity in existence. The universe is limited. You cannot show me in the universe an infinite amount of something, an infinite amount of units of something. So infinity doesn't exist because it's an abstract object. It exists as an idea in our heads, numbers exist as ideas in our heads, but numbers don't really exist. Like if I have 2 note cards, really I just have one note card, but there's some relation that allows me to describe them as there being 2, because they have some sort of commonality. The commonality being that they're right next to each other, and this commonality is enough for me to abstractly say that there are 2. And in a way, there's only 2 ones, but there's the numbers actually, the actual numbers, the abstract objects don't exist. They're very useful conventions, useful abstract ideas that we use to understand the world, although they themselves don't exist per se, or that they don't exist in the empirical sense. They only exist maybe in an abstract sense of an idea, but they themselves don't exist. In the way that, like, dragons don't exist, but they exist as an idea. We can think about them. The difference being is that you can't use dragons to explain the world as like you can with numbers. Numbers you can actually use to explain the world. I can use the abstract idea of 2, which doesn't really exist, to explain that there's a relationship between these single solitary objects. But even though 2 doesn't exist, it's only an abstract object, and abstract objects don't exist. So that's my point. Numbers aren't real, so infinity isn't real, but they're still useful ideas that we can use to explain the world. Also, my last bit about that video is the Schrodinger's cat thing at the end. I'm not exactly sure where Big Lundy was getting with it, but the point of Schrodinger's cat was to make fun. This was attack quantum mechanics. Schrodinger's cat wasn't meant to say, hey, this is what quantum mechanics is. What do you all think? It's pretty cool, isn't it? Schrodinger's cat is intentionally strange sounding as a way of attacking quantum mechanics, which he saw as mistaken, at least in this case. The idea being is that you can't really have a cat that's both dead and alive. That's just not possible. But in quantum mechanics, they seem to make the claim that that is the case, that it can be both dead and alive. He says that this isn't the case. This is like saying that if you have a cat in a box and it could be dead, then it is dead and alive at the same time. And then simply looking in the box forces nature's hand. So Schrodinger's cat was not a defense of or an explanation of quantum mechanics of the Copenhagen variety. It was simply a metaphor to attack it. So it's not. It's an attack on quantum mechanics. Anyway, this is my second attempt to make this video because for some reason last time the video got corrupted. So I'm really hoping it doesn't just get corrupted again and I have to do this for a third time. But yeah. Now on to another video that he did, since I haven't hit my 20-minute mark yet. Philosophy is not theology. Theology is religious. Philosophy is very secular. And also, when you say, I don't like people moralizing to me, to give you an idea of what that sounds like to me, imagine if you tried to tell a redneck that evolution exists. That evolution is right. And he responded with, I don't take kindly to you sciencing to me. No one sciences to me. No one can tell me what's right and true in science. Freaking sciencing to me and stuff. Why I oughta... See, because the thing is that ethics, or philosophers, the point isn't to give you these absolute rules. They're simply to clear up the confusion around ethics. They're simply to explain things and to give you very helpful instructions. It's important. That's why I really like virtue ethics. Virtue ethics is not a matter of absolute rules that you must always follow. Virtue ethics is simply it seems like we want to be happy and healthy, so let's try to figure out ways to do that. Well, here's habits which are good for us to follow all the time, and here's habits which are not good for us to follow all the time. So let's go with that. Also, do you understand the idea of common sense morality? Are you worried about that at all? Are you worried about the idea that our sense of right and wrong is simply culturally based and evolutionary based, that it's simply how we feel is right and wrong, or that it's just a part of our social biology? Philosophy answers these kinds of questions, and I want to counter your don't moralize to me stuff with the trolley example. The first bit of the trolley is say that it basically goes like this. If you pull a lever, you kill one person and you save 500. Do you pull the lever? The second bit is you can push a guy, and by physically pushing them, they die, but in the process you save 500 people. You should say yes to both or no to both. If you say yes to one and no to the other, you're wrong and you're making a mistake. The problem is that common sense morality, if you take philosophy out of ethics, if you take reasoning about this out of ethics, you'll end up with the problem of people saying yes to pulling the lever and no to pushing a man to his death, because our social biology, our feelings, get in the way of reasoning and philosophizing about ethics to the point to where we can pull a lever because we're not touching anyone, but we can't push a man to his death because it's touching someone, when rationally the answer should be the same for both. So right, how do you without philosophy, how do you determine right and wrong without simply relying on your feelings, without simply relying on your social biology and your innate consciousness that you were born with because you're not a sociopath? Only sociopaths are born without the ability to feel right and wrong. Because I feel like if you don't do philosophy, then how can you do more than simply feel your way around right and wrong? How can you can't reason about right and wrong without philosophy. You can only feel. And feeling is not evidence for anything. Well, it could be, there's certain situations where it could be like, if you want to be really pedantic, like, what was he feeling? He was feeling angry. Okay. Then it could be evidence. But it can't be evidence for right and wrong. So without philosophy, you can only rely on your innate sense of right and wrong. You can't reason about it. So you're literally saying, without realizing it, that you're literally saying that you can't reason about ethics. You can't do any of that reasoning stuff. You can only feel your way around it. Because if you do any reasoning about ethics, bam, you're doing philosophy. Right off the bat. And I could say more, but I'm just going to leave it at that because this video is already way too long for a YouTube video. And I think I should have chopped this up in little bits, but I can't. But I've decided not to. So yeah, that's it.